His father is a filet mignon, and he's an egg McMuffin. There's nothing more tragic than an egg that thinks it's a filet.
That's such a stupid quote. I hate that.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z.
Hey, welcome everybody. This is Cut the Chit Chat. I'm Jake Moss.
And I'm Nathan Labonte.
And this is a podcast on the filmographies of Nicolas Cage.
Do you want to redo that?
No, I wanted to do it quick. Let me finish this, all right? Fuck you.
You started talking over my name.
Every episode, we're going to get wet in the deep waters of one of the most criticized careers in Hollywood.
We're going to get very wet.
All to do what? All to answer the question.
Why is Nicolas Cage? Why is Nicolas Cage?
You make that sound so foreboding.
But it is a foreboding question.
It's not an existential question. We're not justifying why he was born.
But in a way, are we?
Hey. All I'm wondering, why he do what he do?
Why he do what he do?
What you doing, Nicolas Cage?
But he's an actor. Which is an important thing to know right from the outset. He acts in movies, and actors are very, this is a generalization, but actors are very concerned about themselves, let's say.
One might consider Nicolas Cage to be on the top of the charts as far as self-concerning.
That's debatable. I think he's like at the bottom of the scale these days, but back in the day he was very much about that. But the point being, what is an actor if they're why? Like, what are they if they aren't an actor?
And I think one of the reasons why this was such a kind of enticing topic of conversation for me anyways is because I think he's so controversial. I mean, listen, he's not controversial in what I think a lot of people are considering the usual way now, you know. Hopefully he's never going to be canceled.
He's never played a character in blackface, as far as I know.
I'm really disappointed that he didn't play Robert Downey Jr.'s character in
Tropic Thunder.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting. I want to see that
representative dichotomy.
Because he's Robert Downey Jr. can play like these very broad characters. Nicolas Cage has a lot more like focused acting going on, whereas I think Robert Downey Jr. for the most part is a little more broad in what he does.
But I think Nicolas Cage focuses in on a broad scale. Like he's going for polarity.
Right.
Almost for polarity's sake. I mean, no, he's going for the paycheck.
He's going for
Listen, all right, I'm no judgment here. Nick, he's got a bit of a gambling problem.
You know, we all have our vices, and
he's also got a little. I heard his gambling problem is so bad he started gambling on how long his own marriage will last. Last one, 4 days. I heard he got a really big paycheck.
And you know what? He bet on it. That's why he got married, and that's why he got divorced. And Nick Cage, we are on to you.
I respect it.
So we're doing a podcast.
Is that what this is?
This is a podcast.
I'm just here to have a conversation. I was just feeling really lonely, and sitting at home.
And we spent an hour, just kind of working on setting up mics, getting a recording going, because we just wanted to have a conversation.
Isn't that what anyone does when they want to have a conversation? A candid conversation. They spend hours setting up microphones, testing the levels.
Let's talk about what we're going to talk about today, because we aren't going through his filmography chronologically.
No,
that's kind of the obvious. How are we going to talk about this actor?
And frankly, I would almost argue that's the right way to do it.
It's probably the right way to do it. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to jump around as we see fit, basically.
We want to. I was really hoping we could touch on the favorites. And then mix in some really bad ones, because at the end of the day, I want to what I see as talking about, mostly highlighting, isn't so much like, ooh, we're going to talk about the controversial actor, but like I want to explore like why is there such polarizing views on like whether he's good or whether he's bad. Like it's not it's a spectrum, right? It's neither here nor there. It's just per the context of a role. It is what it is.
Yeah, I think Nick Cage is fascinating because he's got such a diverse filmography.
Yeah.
He's been in the business since the 80s, so he's still working in the 2010s, and some might say more prolific now than ever, doing like 10 like zero budget movies a year.
Yeah.
And his roles are so diverse, but he has so many through lines in his acting.
It's interesting that he has this reputation, but he's not a superstar. Like, not in the classical sense. He's just popular because what he does is so out there and is so eye-catching and ear-grabbing, depending on the accent that he's giving in whatever role. You know, Ghost Rider came out, and I remember people, friends flocking to it just because it was Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, and
but he's no Brad Pitt, you know. There aren't going to be girls and single moms and rushing to theaters to see him in his next, you know, performance.
Yeah, and even his latest critically acclaimed hit.
Singing drunkenly at the karaoke bar. That's what you're talking about, right? That TMZ sketch?
Yes, that had 10 billion views on YouTube, I think.
I heard he produced, directed, and starred in that.
He also did cinematography.
I don't know who his DOP was, though.
But his latest quote unquote hit, especially in the critical community, was Mandy, and it made 1.4 million at the American box office, which that is a hit for an indie movie in some ways.
What was it? What was its budget?
About 6 million.
Oh, okay.
So it was a bit of a flop, I guess you could say. But considering how many theaters it was playing in, I was keeping up with it, and it stayed in theaters for a pretty long time. But it just wasn't in enough theaters.
It played first in Sundance, right?
Yeah, I think it was Sundance that it hit, and then it opened in September of 2018 in 75 theaters, and it made 1.2 million. So within 8 weeks, 1.2 million, 75 and fewer theaters. I think it did pretty well. But that's his latest hit. So I would argue that he's not even a bankable movie star right now. His biggest hit is, if I'm not mistaken, actually National Treasure.
Oh, 1 and 2, they were the highest earning for those respective years.
Yeah, and in fact, National Treasure Book of Secrets grossed more domestically than the first one did, which makes you wonder, why isn't there a National Treasure 3?
I don't want to get into this.
We can get into that later.
It's a vulnerable topic for me to discuss.
It's a sore spot. It still hurts.
It's always going to hurt. It's going to hurt until they release it. I'm going to be sitting in the theater in tears watching that. And
worldwide, his biggest hit is The Croods. Funny enough.
That's not funny at all. Why are you laughing?
It's a movie that I've not seen, but I'm sure the demands of this extended multi-week conversation will demand that I see it at some point.
There's nothing like some wholesome PC content. You know, it's the perfect, back in the day before they invented divorce and before they invented adultery, and like it was all about survival. You know, the family was the pinnacle of human evolution back in the Stone Age.
The only thing crude about them is the utensils they use to eat their food, and by that I mean their hands.
I would have argued that they didn't shower is a great point about, you know, how crude they were.
That's an arguable point.
Like, you're speaking about utensils, but in my opinion,
okay, it's a double
body
whammy.
odor would be a really big issue.
They didn't shower, they didn't wash their hands, and then they ate the food with their hands. That's not healthy. That's how they got it.
Again, you know, they didn't have hospitals. There's a lot more unhealthy going around than just not washing their hands before they eat.
We can get to the Croods when we get to the Croods, which may not be for another 5 years or something. I want to start talking about the film we're going to talk about this week, which...
Now, I just want to say what it's not.
Okay, what isn't it?
It's not National Treasure.
That is correct.
And it's also not National Treasure...
Book of Secrets. Okay.
I heard the running title for a long time was National Treasure. Ed Harris is the Declaration of Independence.
Did Ed Harris play the Declaration of Independence in The Croods?
I think if you take a step back and look at it on like a metaphysical level, maybe.
Maybe. It also isn't Ghost Rider, which we've mentioned.
Oh, man. It's so good.
Okay, you know what? Actually, before talking about...
Have you seen his jacket? It's so greasy.
That's why we have to talk about... Before we talk about the movie we're going to talk about this week, we have to talk about us for like 2 seconds.
Oh, yeah. What are you about, Nathan?
What am I about? Okay, so between the two of us, we both are fans of Nicolas Cage, formerly known as Nicolas Coppola.
I've always thought of myself as an advocate on his behalf.
An advocate. You've actually been his lawyer once or twice.
Yeah, he's a family friend.
I would argue that your fandom, I don't like using that word, but your fandom of Nicolas Cage is more, it's greater than mine. I like Nicolas Cage quite a bit. I like a lot of his roles, but you've seen way more Cage flicks than I have.
I think you'd actually be surprised, but
No.
I have spent a lot of time immersing myself in that, because for me, I've never been one to subscribe to the monoculture, and I think it's so important when it comes to topics that surround pop culture to force yourself to kind of step into the waters a little bit. You know, I think there's a lot of people there that see his method. And so I wanted to know about that in order to help understand. I mean, there was a bunch of other actors too, obviously, but part of my interest in him stems from me trying to understand acting as a career in general. You know, there's other people that I've, flocked to over the years as well, but he's definitely top tier. And then with that came the disregard for the kind of machoistic Cage hatred. People just like hating on him because he's out there and he's on his own what he's doing.
Yeah, it's easy to hate Nicolas Cage just because his modern mythos, I guess, is this guy who's into a bunch of bad movies that no one sees, and he just does it for the paycheck and this and that. But I think that he's a lot more interesting than that. He reminds me actually a lot of Ethan Hawke, in that Hawke is this character actor who takes on, he'll do almost anything. Like he did Sinister, which is a horror movie. He works with Linklater a lot. He'll do a bunch of like very little small movies. He did the Hamlet movie where he's in a blockbuster wearing a tube. It's important because as he's doing the to be or not to be speech, he walks through the action aisle.
It's a blockbuster. I was thinking
it's a
blockbuster.
blockbuster. No,
it's fantastic.
No. It's great. And then there's like a bunch of movies in the background that you recognize, and it's great. But Nicolas Cage and Ethan Hawke are two actors that are very similar, I find. The main difference is that Ethan Hawke will read his scripts before agreeing to do a project.
And again, part of that, I think, is the context of these people and their performances. Like so many times, all we see is what's put forward on the screen. But really, when you sit down and you listen to these actors talk about their roles and what influenced them in the way they kind of perceive the characters and then decide to act them on screen, you really start to take another appreciation of what they're doing. You know, Vampire's Kiss is probably, I mean, National Treasure is a hot contender, but maybe my favorite, first of all, because of how divisive it is, but also because it's not until you kind of look through Nick's eyes for his character that you realize like there's a whole other level to it, and it's not just this naive as written character. Like the movie is about his performance of the character. It's the character's performance. It's not about the character. You know, symbolically, it's representative of so much. Ethan Hawke, I think on a similar level, it's not a lot, but he's significantly more reserved just across the board. He's done a lot of characters that are really dry, played a lot closer to the cuff. And in Weatherman, I feel Nicolas Cage deliberately taking that approach to his character, where it's significantly reined back, but there are times he lets himself through the cracks of the character, and there are some choice scenes that I think really, really play well.
That is a great segue. Thank you for introducing our film of the week. Today we're going to talk about The Weatherman.
Did we not already say that?
No, we didn't introduce it yet. But this is good, though. It's better just to jump right in. Nicolas Cage would want us to do it this way, I think.
I think so.
So let's talk about The Weatherman. It's a 2005 film directed by Gore Verbinski.
Love that dude.
A Chicago weatherman separated from his wife and children debates whether professional and personal success are mutually exclusive. That's an interesting
interpretation.
Scene, as I'm pretty sure they're divorced.
Yep, already, yeah. I mean, maybe they're only separated. Legally, you have to be separated for a year in order to actually be divorced. In Ontario, anyways, that's the rule.
That's true. This is a real Chicago movie. So
big time.
So it's interesting that us Canadians I've never been to Chicago. Have you?
Passed through it once.
Okay. Because this is...
And it was, I would argue it's the parts of the city that have more or less... The parts we passed through were the abandoned parts. So we saw a lot of the emptied housing after the housing bubble. It almost seemed like rural Chicago, if that's a thing.
But based on my knowledge of Chicago, it's known as the Windy City. It's a place where weather is extremely important and people rely on it a lot. It's a city with tall skyscrapers, a lot of business activity, especially where the Weatherman takes place within Chicago. This film is directed by Gore Verbinski, who is one of the most interesting Hollywood directors, I think.
One of the most prolific.
No.
No. I mean, sorry. One of the most financially successful.
Yes, and no.
I'm sorry. I mean, one of the most is not that's not a topic of contention. He is in the top tier.
Okay.
Of course, there are ones better.
But it's my point is that he had a lot of big successes, but he's also had a lot of monumental failures.
Arguably more, which is funny to say because he really doesn't have a long filmography.
No, it's like 10 movies, I think.
Oh, not even that.
So he made Mouse Hunt and The Mexican. Those were his first 2 movies, which I haven't seen either of them.
I've heard interesting things about The Mexican, but
that's with
I think interesting on a negative sense.
Is that the one with Brad Pitt and Julia Roberts? Yes, yes, it is. So his first 2 movies did pretty well for their budgets, but then in 2002 he broke out with The Ring, which was a big success, and it's still considered one of the good horror movies of the 21st century.
Ah, yes, The Ring with Emma Watson and Tom Hanks, 2017, right?
Did you see that?
No, I didn't, but I just remember it being one long TED Talks trailer.
That's The Circle, but
oh man, I'm glad you got my joke. I was worried for a second there.
It was a good joke.
I don't have a lot of credibility, so I didn't want to lose all of it off of a bad joke.
So after The Ring, he went on to make Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, which is it was a very it did pretty well.
It was a good time.
It did pretty well at the box office. It made $650 million worldwide,
which that's pretty good.
That's very good.
But on top of that, it set the tone for really bringing pirates back into style.
Beforehand, pirates were not a thing.
Well, they were a thing.
They were a thing, but people didn't really care about pirates.
Listen, no one cared about Blackbeard. Peg leg wasn't a fashionable statement. The earrings, tattoos, striped shirts.
So
all this was just it was the bullshit of like pop culture of the past. We're in the future, baby.
That's true. That's very true. And there were, how many Pirates movies there were?
I think now we're running on 27, right?
27 is exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. They're rivaling the MCU at this point. I actually heard they're looking to merge the two.
To merge the two. Pirates of the Caribbean Endgame is going to come out.
Yeah, it's going to be one of the greatest crossovers.
So the first Pirates was a huge success. And
the first pirate ever.
The first pirate ever.
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp, our beloved
wine monsieur.
So the first Pirates movie made $650 million worldwide.
That's good.
Gore Verbinski directed.
Did you see it in theater?
No, I did not see it in theaters.
Are you too young?
I saw nothing in theaters until like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That's a whole other can of worms.
You really want to introduce that as the movie that was the breakout for you, eh?
It was either that or 8 Below. I don't remember which one came out first.
You know what? I just realized that's your love and heated passion for Tilda Swinton. That's where that comes from.
From 8 Below?
No, from Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
You know what? She is very good in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I recently rewatched the battle sequence at the end. It's actually pretty solid.
Oh, I don't want to talk about that.
It's a decent movie.
Let's not talk about that. Pirates.
So Gore Verbinski directed the second and third Pirates, Dead Man's Chest, and
those don't exist.
Well, for a movie that doesn't exist, Dead Man's Chest made $1 billion at the box office.
Not actually.
It did worldwide.
What was the drop off after the first week?
After the first week, so the first weekend it made 135 domestic. It did 54% drop to 62 the second weekend.
I mean, that's a pretty mind-blowingly good first week.
It's a good first week, and it's kind of an average drop.
Yeah. Because that's what it was. I mean, it was a below-average flick, but at that time, this was where I feel like Hollywood serial blockbusters were coming back in style.
The early 2000s are a really fascinating time for blockbusters.
That's a word.
What?
I just think they're so disgusting. That's all.
Did I say disgusting?
No. You said fascinating.
Oh, it is. No, it's a fascinating time.
I guess. Yeah. All right.
Because you've got the Spider-Man trilogy, which is really kind of establishing
love it.
What superhero movies can be. You've got the X-Men.
Hey, real quick.
Yeah.
Pizza time.
Is that
I just wanted to get one in. Sorry.
Is that a quote from Spider-Man?
Yeah. Let's keep going.
Yeah, so X-Men came out in 2000, and that's kind of the beginning of the modern superhero movie trend.
It's the beginning of Hugh Jackman's.
The beginning of Hugh Jackman's career, too.
Yeah.
Which is pretty incredible. But then Pirates comes out in 2003, and then 2006, the next one comes out. And then the third one in 2007, I believe. And the third one made 963 million worldwide. So it didn't quite hit the billion milestone.
But that's still so good.
It is. But mind you, they had huge budgets. The first one was about 150 million. Second was 225. And the third was 300 million.
You know why? This is Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp.
You know, he needed a lot of wine for those. Actually, any time where he's drinking wine on set, it's real wine.
It is real wine, and he was drunk on set every day. Not a fact that didn't happen.
They actually, so they used the same set, the same tank that was developed for Titanic. As far as I remember, they built the ship. That was all practical, as far as I understand, and they filled it with Pinot Grigio.
I wasn't sure if you were doing like a joke or
no. I think they actually used the same tank. The tank in the ship was real, but yeah, they filled it with Pinot Grigio and just CG'd, made it blue. And food coloring, I'm not really sure which.
They CG'd Johnny Depp in there as well.
Between takes, he wouldn't even go to food service. He'd just dive into the water.
Just dive in and open his mouth.
Yeah, Jared Leto cites his performance as, a really inspirational one to his like version of whatever you want to call what he does on screen.
His public life is inspired by Johnny Depp.
Oh man, his public life is greasy.
So Gore Verbinski, after that, made Rango, The Lone Ranger, and A Cure for Wellness. Which was kind of diminishing returns. Rango was 123 domestic. The Lone Ranger, although it did make 260 million worldwide, it was a 215 production budget. So when you factor in marketing and all those other expenses, it was a flop.
Yeah.
It made 89 domestic, which when you think about it, like Avengers made 3 times that in its opening weekend.
But that's Avengers. That's
Avengers. But I actually watched The Lone Ranger as well in preparation, and
we're not here to talk about Gore.
But he's such a fascinating guy.
I mean, maybe,
The Lone Ranger is a very good movie.
Daddy issues manifest themselves in such different ways.
Okay, so the important thing about Gore Verbinski, other than the fact that he made A Cure for Wellness, which is a bonkers movie.
Mia Goth is such an interesting person.
And yeah, she plays like
you know what my main thing was watching that whole flick? First of all,
the beautiful cinematography.
I hate eels. Love them in sushi. I will never be able to look an eel in the face ever again.
Yeah,
deep throating an eel. No, thank you.
That shot of the eel swimming through the tube and down Dane DeHaan's throat.
Second of all, where'd Mia Goth's eyebrows go?
Dane DeHaan probably licked them off or something. All this to say, Gore Verbinski has had a very commercial career up until the point that he didn't.
Wildly commercial. He almost doesn't exist out of it. His 2 movies prior, The Mexican and The Ring, really sat outside of that. It was 2 or 3 before.
Mouse Hunt and The Mexican. The Ring, I think, it wasn't produced by Jerry Bruckheimer, because the Pirates movies as well as Rango and The Lone Ranger were co-productions with Disney and Jerry Bruckheimer, producer extraordinaire. So sandwiched right between the first Pirates and the second Pirates is this little indie movie called The Weatherman, starring Nicolas Cage. And in case you
weren't aware,
in case you forgot what we're talking about this week,
and I wouldn't blame you,
it was shot on a budget of 22 million, and it made 12.5 domestic and 6.5 worldwide for a total of about 19 worldwide.
That's a flop.
Which I think is kind of sad, but I wouldn't have really expected it any other way. If you think about it now, The Weatherman isn't a movie that would get made today. No one.
Oh no, of course not.
No one would make this movie with $22 million. It would be made for $2 million and go straight to Netflix.
Straight to Netflix or the Hallmark Channel.
Or the
no. It doesn't promote. It doesn't promote healthy PC relationships. Never mind. Of course.
So it's. I think it's just fascinating because this reminds me of Christopher Nolan, which unfortunately all things do now thanks to the internet. But between making Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, Nolan made a small, an indie movie, if you can call it that, called The Prestige, which actually was not super indie because I think it was made with the studio and it grossed $100 million worldwide. But it's the same kind of thing where you make one super commercial, super successful movie, and then a sequel that does even better than the first one. And then right between the two, you make this small movie that doesn't do quite as well.
It's a passion project.
A passion project. Now, the weird thing is, I don't know if The Weatherman is a passion project.
I don't think so.
For Gore Verbinski.
I don't think Gore Verbinski has enough of a palette to his work to have a passion project.
That's the thing, because his blockbusters are actually really idiosyncratic, I find.
They're just all over the place.
His movies have a strong anti-capitalism streak, though.
And I guess also this idea of the anti-normative individual, this person that stands against the grain.
That's a very good point.
And is really it. And I think that relates really specifically to The Weatherman.
But in other ways, his personal vision does come through, mostly in like the visual styling and in the camera work and in how the cinematography is, because most of Gore Verbinski's movies have this kind of icy, kind of greenish, grayish look to them, especially the more recent ones.
Not Pirates.
No. I think Pirates is kind of an outlier in that regard. But if you look at The Ring, if you look at Cure for Wellness and The Lone Ranger, they all have that very muted, drab color palette.
Cure for Wellness is heavy in the greens.
Yes, I love the cinematography. I think actually
it's really gothic. It's strangely gothic.
It's Mia Gothic.
Oh damn! Shai's gonna run in and like hit us with some promo for his wife or something. I don't know.
Is that Shia LaBeouf's wife?
Yeah, Mia Goth.
No way.
Yeah,
okay. Man. I probably knew that and just forgot about it.
He will not divide us.
No, we will not let him do that to us. Where was I? I was talking about his cinematography. I'm pretty sure The Weatherman was shot on film.
It looks like 16 millimeter.
It kind of does, although I think it would make more sense if it was 35. It was shot on 35. I think his digital movies look better than his film movies.
They're a lot cleaner.
Yeah.
He doesn't use, it's interesting, he doesn't really capitalize on the dynamics that film really offers, and The Weatherman comes out looking very flat, and I think part of that's to do with the kind of thematic elements he's dealing with through the main character, but it's really not a dynamic picture compared to Pirates of the Caribbean, compared to Rango. You know, both Pirates of the Caribbean was such a dynamic imagery, and you think the comparison between the two, like, you just don't get the same range that you do on film.
Kind of interesting though, because the cinematographer on The Weatherman is I'm going to mispronounce his name, but Fedon Papamichael.
Hey, I'll take it.
Which is an incredible last name, I got to say. If my name was Papamichael, I would flaunt that everywhere.
Fucking legendary, man.
This guy is Alexander Payne's usual cinematographer, which is interesting because this movie feels like it's got shades of Alexander Payne in it. But he also shot Huntsman: The Winter's War and The Monuments Men.
Huntsman starring Kristen Stewart?
Yes, and I think this is the one with Charlize Theron. I've seen neither of them.
I think that was Snow White. There was 2 Snow White stories that came out within like a year of each other.
I didn't realize they were different. I thought they were sequels.
Yeah. And then there was a sequel to the Charlize Theron starring Emily Blunt as her sister. Like, crazy stories. That just come out, like, these 2 movies come out back to back. But Kristen Stewart very much owns the kind of a subversive princess character.
I honestly can't believe this. The main cast for Huntsman: Winter's War is Chris Hemsworth, Charlize Theron, Jessica Chastain.
Jessica Chastain was such a fucking maverick thrown in there. She came out from left field.
She plays Sarah.
I don't know who fucking Sarah is.
I haven't seen either of these movies. It also stars, like you said, Emily Blunt, as well as Nick Frost and Rob Brydon.
It's so out there, dude.
Maybe I need to see these.
Listen, say what you will about them. They're a good time.
Fair enough. A good time. We'll come back to that.
On a scale of 1 to 10, they're a good time. The sequel's wild. But yeah, the first one made with Kristen Stewart, that one I do remember visually was pretty beautiful. Like, they donned the armor and they really capitalized on the costuming.
The cinematographer for The Weatherman was Papamichael. But for the later movies, in fact, for most of his other movies, Verbinski's used a man by the name of Bojan Bazeli, who I'm probably mispronouncing.
Oh, man, who are these dudes with these names?
I love it.
I gotta meet them.
This guy did A Cure for Wellness, as well as The Lone Ranger, as well as The Ring. Also, interestingly enough, Pete's Dragon, which had some very beautiful photography. But he used a different cinematographer for The Weatherman, which I think is kind of interesting. And I don't know why he did, but I think while the cinematography works for the character and for the story, I think his digital is just better. I don't know. Maybe it's the crispness or the way that he can use the color with digital. But I think his film work isn't quite at the level.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't feel like he's subscribing himself to his usual palette, even though looking at it retroactively, like, of course, at the time, he's still, I feel like, figuring that out, but it's the standout.
Yeah. So we've got this unique director, Gore Verbinski, who mostly at this point, he's made two huge hits, I would argue, with The Ring. And now he goes between the sequel and makes this small indie movie about a depressed middle-aged man. Written by a guy named Stephen Conrad. The Weatherman was his first actual feature film. Before that, he wrote, I think, a made-for-TV movie by the name of Wrestling Ernest Hemingway. And more recently, he's done screenplays for Pursuit of Happiness.
Secret Life of Walter Mitty. This is something I really wanted to get to.
Yes. Very interesting, actually.
The Weatherman is Secret Life of Walter Mitty done right.
Yes.
And it's really interesting that they try to repaint this picture, but you take the two stories both about these two introverts that are narcissists, the way they're so self-involved. And with Walter Mitty's success, it lessens the impact of the story it's telling, I feel like. I still related to it because I'm a really self-absorbed person, but, you know, just the two stories, they're so vastly different, written by the same guy. Like, that, to me, that's pretty astounding.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, that they are kind of polar opposites of facing reality versus...
two sides to a coin.
Yeah, falling into a false reality. Most recently, Steve Conrad wrote Wonder, which was a surprise hit in 2017. Interesting little career. I think he did creative writing at the Florida State University, then went to Northwestern University. He majored in English.
I actually went there.
Oh.
That's where I went.
Okay, that's right. This
is the alma mater.
So
Florida man.
The core of this story was inspired when Steve Conrad saw his friend chuck a milkshake at a local weatherman. This is true. This is from an interview with Stephen Conrad in the LA Times.
It's fucking legendary.
That's amazing. And he wondered, what is it about a weatherman that would inspire someone to do that? And then from that was birthed this film, The Weatherman. This movie does not necessarily take place in reality.
No, definitely not. It takes place in David Spritz's reality.
Yes, absolutely. Can we dive in?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, so the very first shot is an undulating wave of icy shards in Chicago by an ocean.
Oh, listen.
No. I wrote down my very first note is literal cold open. And we're introduced to this icy landscape that we're going to be living in for like 90% of the movie. You made a note about how the very first word is refresh.
Well, it's not the first word,
but the very first things, because we pan up
the first adjective.
We see the city, and then we cut to this shot of a doorway. And
we're right off the top. We're going like straight into the monologuing, into the voiceover.
Yes, the voiceover, which classic argument is show don't tell, voiceover is no good.
But this is the interesting thing that the movie does. I think it subverts that, because I was very much like mindset of like adaptation, which came out
4 years beforehand.
And it did really feel like there was a little bit of an interesting dichotomy there. Well, like, yeah, you know, normally show don't tell, but at the same time, they're establishing right off the bat that it's so much about his, not even perspective, perception. You know, this is the lens that we're seeing is through the lens of David Spritzel. And right off the top, when we're slapped in the face essentially with that voiceover, we get the realization that this picture is going to be from one man's perspective and his perspective only.
Yeah. And the three first lines are this. I won't do the Nicolas Cage voice. We'll save that for something good. He says, "That was refreshing. I'm refreshed. I'm refreshing.
It's almost like a prayer to himself.
In a way.
Like the voiceover seems to exist as like his own understanding of what's going on around him. Like every time he says something, it's like affirmative to his own action. And I think Nick's kind of drawl of like, I'm refreshed, I'm refreshing, brush my teeth. It's so perfect for kind of the dynamics of the character right off. We get the sense of like, this man just doesn't exist.
And there are two things about it that I really like. The first is that it completely contradicts what he's doing, because his head pops up and then he gives the camera this huge grin. But as he goes through the refreshing, his grin like slowly fades away, because he's trying to sell himself on this lie, but it's not working.
And can I tell you something? The first time I watched this film, do you know how I was feeling with that intro scene?
Very refreshed.
I was feeling pretty refreshed.
Very refreshed.
Yeah, it was very refreshing. It's like someone popped a mint in my mouth.
And it sets up this, I think there are 3 moments where the idea of refreshment is brought up. The second time is when he goes to do the screen test for the position at Good Morning America. And the person actually says that he is refreshing, which is, I was like, oh, that's a callback. He actually is refreshing when he's on the air.
But is it a callback, or is it just a thematic element that's...
Well, I mean, it can be both, can't it?
I was talking before about like this setting seeming like a character of the film. The climate really seems to reflect his shift in the personal life that happens throughout the film. We have these strange dynamics. The ebb and flow of the weather going from predictable to non-predictable mirrors the way his life is kind of working itself out, very much like against his will. I think that intro shot kind of introduces us to that.
So then we have this very mundane morning of montage where he's going through his apartment. It sets up this visual motif that I found interesting, where he's often framed through a doorway,
or a window,
He's
against a window, backlit.
He's framed through some kind of trapping thing, like a doorway or a window or anything like that.
We see him walking through the office. He's framed against the city at literally the top of his game.
Yes,
it's one of the few points where he's above it all, and then we see him descend into that kind of city life madness.
Yes.
Sorry, I wanted to get back to the point I was mentioning earlier about Gore Verbinski's draw to the abnormal. The whole "I am refreshed" line it's like a prayer to his own ego that he will exist in this state of otherness.
And also it's a reference to his name, because people say that his name Spritz.
Yeah.
It's short, it's snippy, it's refreshing.
Yeah. It's almost like the name of a major soda label.
Is it?
Sprite. I mean, come on.
I'm sorry.
Can we call in the other guy that was going to do this thing with me?
Oh, I killed him. It's that's dark. Yeah. So we also kind of get right after that, we see a shot on his bookcase of different photographs of his family members, and a picture of Michael Caine, who just happens to be in this movie, and the novels that his character has written.
I don't think it's Michael Caine as much as it's Michael Caine's accent.
Michael Caine's accent is a character in this movie. I will not hear any disagreements on this.
It's kind of fascinating the way we're presented with his family, because they're always through a lens of like misunderstanding, and the fact that we're introduced to them solely at first through the photos, and then it's not until we cut to the scene with Mike that we actually even meet Mike. That is kind of a nice little lens to that, just how far separated he is from his family, not only like geographically and living somewhere else, but also emotionally. He just doesn't understand them.
And also, while I was watching, and this was my second time through, so I knew what the movie had in store. But I thought to myself, like, this is a sign of where is his family, because he's in the bathroom alone, as one should be. But then he's in the rest of his house alone, but he's got all these pictures. So like, where is his family? He's alone. So the movie very shortly answers that question. But only after a scene at the DMV, which
it's such a good introduction to him.
So he gets it's not a parking ticket, it's his sticker is out of date, so he has to go to the DMV to get an updated sticker.
Can we count how many times Nicolas Cage utters the word asshole? Can we start a counter?
Yes,
I want to start a counter because this is 2, right?
I would have to go back through.
We're gonna have to. Yeah, we'll count that out. We'll do that later.
So he's at the DMV. This is the first moment where someone recognizes him on the street, which is another one of those recurring incidences.
And again, last place, it's happened to me before, being the celebrity that I am. The last place you want to be spotted is the DMV.
It's very true.
We don't even have the DMV, and I know that's the last place I want to be spotted.
I'm so tempted to like download some audio of this encounter because it's so funny. But the lines that just like blew my mind were Nicolas Cage is getting annoyed with this guy who wants his autograph, and then he says, "I just wanted to wait in line." Then the guy says, "You're on TV, bro."
Like, it's your responsibility. Like, fucking own up. Do whatever you have to do.
Oh man, this conversation is just.
But it feels so honest to like his perspective of like having to live through these interactions. We reference like the karaoke at the bar and stuff like that. Yeah. Nicolas Cage doesn't want to have to care about fans. And he doesn't want to have to exist within that world. He just wants to do the job.
And in an interview with Nicolas Cage, he's asked how closely could he relate to the DMV scene.
Yeah.
And Cage's answer is basically like, well, you know, I've been there, but I try and I try and interact the best as I can with people that I meet. He's very friendly with fans. He likes taking pictures.
I think as an actor that is part of your responsibility. So I don't think that the other guy at the DMV is wrong in what he's saying. I'm just saying, like, I think it's coming from an honest place where like that is something that anyone would be annoyed with, would struggle with, you know.
Yeah. I don't know about you, or maybe I do, but whenever I'm in a public place and I see someone I know, I'll do whatever I can to avoid them.
You socially flee.
I've actually turned right around and walked out of a store because I saw someone that I recognized.
I've witnessed that.
It's so just the concept of being like talked to by a stranger in the DMV just brings me hives too. So I get it. And it's a funny scene. But it's also funny in that kind of very low-key, tragic funny.
It's an introduction to him outside of himself.
Yes.
Like, it's the first time we're confronted with his character existing in a world that doesn't align itself with his perspective.
But perception. I also think what's interesting is that it's like he has this identity that's a public identity.
Sure.
But then he also has this private identity. And when he's in public, which is not to say on television, when he's in public, he's still his private identity.
Yep.
Because his public identity is only when he's the weatherman.
Yep.
So he hates his private identity so much that he doesn't want to be recognized as it.
Yep.
So he'll do anything he can to avoid being known as this guy because he feels this insecurity and this self-hatred. So it's interesting because it's a funny scene, but it sets up his character very nicely in that way.
I agree, yeah.
After that, we get a brief scene of him on the weather, which I think it's fascinating in this scene and in others how charismatic he is while he's doing the weather.
And I like the motif that's used in the soundtrack, the score of like that clicking.
Oh yes,
it's an interesting way to kind of persuade this atmosphere of process of understanding, and like we're gonna dive into this now. And it's used, I think, really nicely throughout the film. There's not a lot of actual music as much as there is just this EDM almost.
Interesting, because I was actually just going to acknowledge the music. I did make a note about the ticking in the soundtrack. It sounds like, first of all, it sounds like a clock because he's waiting in line and he's trying to get through as quickly as he can. Yeah. But it also sounds like his mind is just like
racing.
It's racing. He's just like,
and when it comes up in later scenes involving his family, I think that's a really good motif that carries forward.
Yes.
More importantly and more potently than the other music in the soundtracks that they include.
Well, I actually really like this Hans Zimmer soundtrack, and there's this behind the scenes featurette with him. With Hans, my good friend Hans, who I the other day I actually had to pull up a picture of Hans Zimmer and a picture of Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber because I forgot which one was which.
I'm judging you so hard.
It's because they actually look very similar.
You know, my name is Hans. I met Tom York once.
Well, they both have these kind of throaty voices. Where Hans is little German. And then
I always do a little bit of a comp German. That's just what I do, baby.
But Andrew Lloyd Webber is kind of the same. He's got very deep guttural. I don't even know if I'm doing it right, but they both sound and look very similar to me. Maybe it's just because I'm used to the Paul F. Tompkins, Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber bit.
I feel bad talking smack about Hans. I don't think we should disrespect him because he's going to take this really hard. If there's one thing I know about Hans Zimmer, it's that he really puts himself into his work, and he's going to take all this really personally if it ever crosses his ears.
Hans Zimmer,
and I think everything crosses his ears.
He hears everything.
With a music career like that, he hears everything.
Hans Zimmer is legendary. When the Lion King trailer came out, he tweeted about how everyone was looking forward to the music in it. Which, let's be honest, that's the only thing that people are looking forward to in The Lion King.
Well, I mean, that and seeing every individual strand of hair on Donald Glover, Simba's head.
Oh, no.
I'm really looking forward to when Simba breaks out and starts singing This Is America on screen. It's going to be my favorite scene. I was so angry. I could tell that was Seth Rogen as soon as he chuckled when they're singing a Wimbo. He does that weird, dumb chuckle. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, fuck this.
He plays a dirty warthog. So Hans Zimmer composed the music. It's a fascinating score. It's a reggae influence, kind of like a boom, doo, 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 boom, doo, doo. Very heavily electric guitar influenced.
It's just repetitive motifs. Like, I don't really think the soundtrack is really that much worth talking about outside of that ticking because of just how representative it is. And there's a lot of pop music that's involved as well. I don't know.
You are shaming the name of Hans
I'm
right
not
now.
Shaming. I'm respecting it. I'm just saying, like, what are we talking about? Really, all that matters, you could take away all the other music other than the one, he's a rock, I'm a rock, The Rock,
yeah.
whatever,
we'll
Bob
talk about
Seger. Really everything but that and the ticking, and you'd have a functional score.
But I think that the music integrates so perfectly with the mood and the atmosphere
and Nick's nervous acting,
because it contrasts so deliciously.
Sure.
Because you've got this, as we've talked about, the very cold, icy visuals and this very tropical-ish kind of music, which makes you feel like it reminds you of the beach, basically, and of warm weather. So it's a huge contrast to both what we see and to how Dave Spritz is feeling.
Yeah. I want to talk about Michael Caine.
Let's do it. Let's jump.
I want to talk about only Michael Caine's voice.
Okay, right before you talk about Michael Caine, I have this quote from an LA Times article with the same interview with Steve Conrad. Now, this is how I read this in an interview with Gore Verbinski as well, so it's like a shared idea. They both said about Michael Caine's character and Nicolas Cage's character. His father is a filet mignon, and he's an egg McMuffin. There's nothing more tragic than an egg that thinks it's a filet.
That's such a stupid quote. I hate that.
Excuse me.
It's so fucking uppity.
This is perfect. I read that and I was like, yes, that's it. Michael Caine plays a filet mignon, Jacob. You can't argue with that. And Nicolas Cage...
It's so pretentious.
No!
It is pretentious.
He plays
and
a
I'm not
filet
saying
mignon.
pretentious is a bad thing, but I'm just saying, like, way to oversimplify what I would consider a very good representation of a self-absorbed, mentally unwell narcissist that just cannot escape himself.
Michael Caine?
And no, not Michael Caine. I'm talking about Nicolas Cage, David Spritzel. What kind of plebeian do you think I am?
Oh, I won't answer that question.
Anyways, listen, it's not a bad quote. I like it. It's funny.
It's good.
But it's an oversimplification.
Hey,
and also Michael Caine's performance is really not that good. Like, I like it, but his accent, what is he, Irish American?
Okay, I have exactly one quibble with Michael Caine's performance.
The accent.
He is unable to do an American accent. I don't know why.
I think Irish American is what he's going for. Chicago, that kind of makes sense, but it just doesn't work, and it makes his lines sound so insincere, which one would argue works to the character. But I think it's more in part with bad. Like, I don't think they shouldn't have even dropped the accent to begin with. They should have just let it run, and it would have been more convincing.
Well, the thing about Michael Caine is he's got a bit of a Cockney-ish accent. his accent though is not known for being like a hoity-toity upper class, a Londoner kind of accent.
He's relatable.
He's a relatable
But
guy.
he's not relatable in this.
No, but that's kind of the point. He's playing this model of perfection, and I think I read.
You know what he's playing? He's playing an icicle.
I read in an interview. I'm going to ignore that comment. I read in an interview. I don't remember which
He's playing
one.
a shaky icicle.
Oh, can you stop that? He's playing a shaky icicle.
Well, he's got tremors.
He's got lymphoma.
No, I don't know about lymphoma, but I think he plays the lymphoma at least once or twice in the film.
Okay, in an interview, he mentions, or someone mentions, that Atticus Finch was an inspiration for this character.
Atticus Finch has a mid-Atlantic accent.
Atticus Finch does not have a mid-Atlantic
Yes,
accent.
he definitely does.
He was played by Gregory Peck in the 50s.
Your point being?
They pretty well dropped the mid-Atlantic by the end of the 50s. Whatever the point is, it's a wonderful performance, I think.
It's another man that struggles to understand people, and throughout the whole film, all he's trying to do is grasp onto these strings of a changing culture that he just does not understand. Like, he hasn't written things in years. Like, he was well known for his pieces of writing, but he hasn't published in years. He's got this tragic lymphoma, which is, I'm sure it's really tough for Michael Caine. I don't know what he's going to do with that. And he's got this tragic accent, but like, all these things are it's a web connecting to a man who's lost in the generation he's living, and he has a really interesting perspective because of that. And I think that's one of the saving graces for David Spritzel's character, because near the end he realizes that he has to reach out from himself a little bit more, and there's a really great scene in his car.
Let's talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Here's what I like about his performance. You believe that he won a Pulitzer. First of all, that's the genius of casting Michael Caine.
I do believe that.
You take one look at him and
he's very
yes.
reverent. He's very reverent.
Yes. The second thing I love about the writing around his character is how he shows up out of nowhere,
everywhere,
every single time,
inexplicably.
It's
like
amazing.
That scene near the end in the car. Like, he just drives up, and you're like, "What are you doing here, Michael? Go home. You're shaking."
The time I could just list all of the scenes with Michael Caine, but the one scene where Nick Cage is walking down the street and then he gets hit by a Frosty. And
Michael Caine just walks up and he's like, what is David? What is this, David? David?
And the way that Nick Cage is trying to explain to him like what a Frosty is
a Frosty.
So Michael Caine sees that he gets hit with this Frosty.
Of course he sees it.
And he's like, what just happened?
And it is such a quick cut too to Michael Caine just walking up like
out of
to
nowhere.
The point that he'd almost have to be ignorant not to see it hit him. And he just walks up with this like disconcern, like, how dare you approach my throne covered in this frosted ice.
Yeah. And so then Nick Cage is like, I got hit with a Frosty.
And then Michael Caine just demands he explain what a Frosty is.
He's like,
what is that?
What is a Frosty?
What's on you right now?
And then Nick Cage says a Frosty is a shake from Wendy's.
The branding in this film is impeccable.
The second scene is the Big Gulp scene.
Can I just say, I would have been so much more convinced with Gore's career if he'd focused a little bit more on this like anti-capitalism.
It's kind of interesting because this isn't him versus the man. This is about him versus himself.
Yeah, yeah.
And all the other Gore movies are about a loner versus the man. So this is curiously introspective. Mm-hmm. But in that scene also, Michael Caine tells him that he has lymphoma. Faux ma. Yeah, and then there's the scene that comes even a little earlier when they go to the hospital just for the routine checkup.
Mm-hmm. The repetition of the joke where like we get hit with this like, okay, he's going to get his dad something, and then we see the process, we see his thinking, and he gets caught up in it himself, and then at the end we're presented with like the results, like I only had enough to grab a coffee, and we understand, we get it, but Caine doesn't. He's like, so you didn't give me a fucking paper?
Can I just shout out the best performance in this movie? the actor who plays Joel at Arby's.
I didn't even realize he was a named character. That's amazing.
I read his name tag. His name is Joel, and
80 cents, man.
Nicolas Cage walks up and asks to trade a $1 bill for quarters, and he's like, "Can you do that?" And Joel's just like, "Not really." And he says "not really" 3 times to the same question, I'm pretty sure.
I've been in those pants. I've been in Cage's pants and I've been in Joel's pants. Both accounts, man.
It's not a great way to phrase it, saying you've been in people's pants, but
so he doesn't have enough change, but he has the coffee.
The 72 cents. I love that pan down.
I think, again, the branding.
Yes. There's a whole lot of branding in here. When he's on the phone with his wife after he gets hit with the big gulp, and she's like, "What's wrong?" And he's like, "A big gulp. I just got hit with a big gulp."
He addresses it like the weather. He's just like, "Oh, I was just another fucking big gulp," or like, "Damn, that was an apple pie, man." Like,
then he later clarifies that it was McDonald's apple pie.
Like, but those are hot.
That harkens back to the scene late in the movie where he and his son are in the food court, and it's one of his more introspective moments, where he says, "I'm fast food," while he's sitting in the middle of this giant fast food court.
It's one of these opportunities to break out of the narrative into a little bit more of an honest space. The inner monologue, again, is like how he perceives things and how we should be reminded that everything is through his lens of perception. And he just pulls this line of like, "I'm fast food." And it's so stupidly simple that you're like, I guess.
It also makes sense because you do have that montage where he's hit with like 5 items of fast food in a row, which is just like that was basically the hook. A weatherman, but he also gets hit with fast food because he's a weatherman. I think there's one part in this movie that really doesn't work.
The daughter?
No.
Okay, because I was going to say I love her character.
She's great.
Go ahead.
Now, I love Nicholas Hoult. I think he's become a very good actor, and he also struggles with an accent here.
Is it an accent or is it a lisp? I think it's a speech impediment.
I thought he was trying to do an American accent.
Is he English?
He's English, yeah.
Oh, I hadn't realized.
He plays Tolkien as a very good English schoolboy, apparently.
Have you seen it?
I have not. My brother did.
It's a film where I feel like it's either going to be great or it's going to be horrific, and it's more likely to be horrific.
Yeah. Now, I don't have a problem or too many problems with Holt's performance. He looks like a 12-year-old despite playing 15.
This is before he started huffing silver paint, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. This is a decade before he huffed silver paint.
He should have started sooner.
This is right before he broke out in the British TV show Skins, which he's great in. But the whole subplot with him and the pedophile counselor it really lands flat,
and like it's so far removed. There's the crossover really only happens till the end. There's 2 or 3 interactions at a time where they're actually in the same scene, and it's like a shared sequence between him and his son, but everything's so separate that like you just get a sense of like he has nothing to do with his children's lives.
Yeah, I made a note somewhere that all of the scenes between him and his son are just really weird. Like their conversation.
And the cuts are hard cuts every time.
Right.
Like the one in the shopping mall, and I'm assuming it's a Old Navy or something like that. I just took a note. I just wanted to mention this. What are you guys doing? Just looking for clothes?
Ugh.
What?
Oh my goodness.
What? Who writes like that? Just say you're shopping.
That's not even the worst part of that scene, which is the counselor going up to them.
Did you look at the friend's reaction the whole time the conversation is happening? The guy, the friend, what's his name? Paul? Fucking Paul is like, I mean, I guess I'm part of this conversation now. And he's just like giving this weird side eye, like he's looking off at his mom offset. And he's like, I don't want to be here anymore, Mom.
And then right when they leave the store, the guy's like, okay, well, I guess I'm heading out now. I'll leave you with this creep. I wrote in all caps, he looks like a creep. Stop
Paul?
it. No, the counselor.
The counselor, of course.
He's got the glasses, he's got the goatee and the mustache and everything. But this leads to the later scene where, for some reason, Nicholas Hoult is over at his house for dinner.
Oh, man. I don't even want to talk about that. That's so uncomfortable.
I wrote 3 words for that scene. Murder that pedophile. And I mean,
I heard they originally cast Kevin Spacey for this role, but it felt a little too
on the nose.
A little too method for him.
They were worried he would keep the pictures. Because the guy does say, take off your shirt.
Bad. And why are they eating salad? Like, it had to be salad.
That is so weird.
In bowls?
Okay, to be fair, my grandparents had made
Yeah, but your grandparents aren't having dinner with 14-year-old children.
Except for me, but my family was also there.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, they had permission.
And as he's taking the pictures, he says, "This is great, man," with a little too much glee in his voice.
The Oscar should have gone to him. Best supporting role.
But this subplot, of course, leads to the moment where Nick Holt gets accused of trying to steal his wallet.
Yeah, and we never see the weight of that, because every time they address the fact that he was accused of doing this, and he was in the position where he almost had to suck off his counselor, it felt like something that was just thrown in.
That reminds me of the best line in this movie, where Kane says.
I took it down. All this sucking off and jacking off.
What is this? Sucking and chucking rocks?
Sucking and chucking and jacking. Again, it's just angry Michael Caine grasping at straws, trying to understand a society that he has no bearing in anymore.
In the same way that he's like, do you know what camel toe is?
Do you know what camel toe is, David?
David.
Do
you know that people are calling your daughter camel toe?
And then, I actually took down a note of like the worst thing in the world, World War II, and there's a lot of bad
AIDS.
stuff. AIDS is really bad. I mean, there's a list, but it's probably around number 7, is having to listen to Michael Caine in a bad accent explain to me what camel toe is.
And Nick Cage is kind of our surrogate in that moment, because he's like,
so uncomfortable. He's like, please, Dad, please.
And we get one very brief, uncomfortable, like close up. No, we get a short montage of what a camel toe is.
So short. There's a few other, like, other than the counselor who's a really pervy atmosphere.
Yes,
Cage has his own kind of pervy mentality, but
in a way,
is like he's so far separate from his wife that it's like very clear that he's tried to find these avenues of release,
right? Like,
and it's a little too honest with it.
Yeah,
I feel like.
I think probably my least favorite shot is him.
Like Gore. I felt like Gore was kind of translating something a little too close to the cuff on that one.
Are you talking about the Abe Lincoln shot?
Oh, dude, the Abe Lincoln. She looks so uncomfortable. I love that.
But
it was listen. Let me just toss this out there. It was a weighty scene.
It was weighty.
It was a sweaty scene.
Now, I don't want to talk too much about it because it makes me uncomfortable just thinking about that. But the way that she's moving during that brief shot,
it's uncomfortable.
It's deeply uncomfortable, and
it's not real. But again, that's how he's perceiving it. In that moment, he's in his head.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
So that's how I think the hard cuts between him and his son having to deal with the counselor, they don't befit the storytelling, because it would be so much better to get a little bit of a narrative translation to the scenes, just to get the idea that, like, this is how Spritzel sees the counselor exclusively. Like have the scene where Mike's walking back home, and Cage is just sitting in his car looking at the family. I was like, well, honestly, like, that's pretty bad. But why not have the counselor dropping him off in that first kind of interaction where Spritzel's forced into, like, oh, this is what's going on, completely justifies the character, being presented the way he is, but there's never that crossover until the end and he gets assaulted.
No, that's basically the flaw of it, is that the counselor is only there to be a representation of Dave's failures as a parent.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about Michael Caine's character. He was a perfect parent, essentially. There's that moment where Nick Cage, where Dave says, like,
he says he wasn't a bad father.
He tries to argue, like, well, you weren't there. And
I like that because it's this like, he doesn't really have daddy problems.
Yeah,
they're just me problems.
They're him problems. Yeah. And so he can't even blame his father for his own inadequacies at being a father. So we see
he's an egg sandwich.
And Michael Caine's a filet mignon, if you didn't know.
I might change my opinion on that line. I don't know.
It's great. It's amazing. And there's this buildup of reasons why Dave Spritz is such an incompetent person, and why he's kind of a failure in his own eyes. And we can go through those maybe very briefly. But the moment where he doesn't even seek out, he just happens across the counselor after this incident has happened.
Yep.
And he goes up and just punches him in the face.
No, he was seeking him out. That wasn't happenstance. He was seeking.
Oh, that's right.
The parking lot. I mean, come on, dude. Why are you paying attention?
Okay.
Sorry, I'm clocking 4 views at this point. So.
It's all good. You know this one more than I do. But when he punches him in the face and then immediately goes to the food court with his son, that's the moment where he kind of starts to come into his own manhood.
And that works, but we never get the confrontation of like what the counselor actually is.
Right. That's why
it's just physical assault, and then nothing.
And that's why I argue the character doesn't work.
Yeah, your argument, it's not even an argument, it's just fact.
Yeah.
The character doesn't work.
Yeah, so that's probably my biggest issue, I should say, with the film. I
just rolled my eyes.
Look, That's
the second time I've ever rolled my eyes in my life, and it was at that.
What was the first time?
It's being born.
Oh man, I feel that. Another scene I want to look at through the prism of Nick Cage's performance is the therapy scene, because it's such a weird scene and it's input so strangely. Like one quick note: this movie has bonkers pacing. It makes no sense.
It makes no sense, but I kind of like that
because it is through that kind of dream logic.
Yeah, and this is kind of one of the reasons why we want to talk about that stuff, because I think when you're aware of the elements in the film and what's kind of the gears that are coming together to make it work, you can kind of better appreciate the folly of it. This performance is so reserved until we get this moments of explosion, and those moments are great, interspersed with this jagged cutting and this weird pacing. It's like one's making up for another, and I kind of like that, but it doesn't always work.
Yeah, Nick Cage goes to his wife's house at one point.
Not just at one, my friend.
Not at one point, which I think actually I wanted to bring this up. This is a really interesting divorced relationship because
it's the perfect New York Chicago relationship,
because they're on good terms. They're like
arguably.
No, they're on good terms.
Well, arguably,
he shows up to her house unannounced, and she doesn't yell at him.
You mean good terms as in he doesn't have a restraining order, is what you're saying?
No, that's
not good terms. That's functional terms.
No. No.
Socially, they're functional. Every scene that they're together, they're arguing.
Maybe
every scene, except for the counseling, in which they later argue.
See, okay, well, let's just talk about the counseling scene. So he goes to her house and basically says, like, I want to try and make this work, which she interprets as like their friendship, and their not even friendship, but just like their.
I agree. Yeah, the amiable relationship between the two for their kids' sake, which is kind of how he presents it too. I want to make it work for the kids.
Yes,
it's not healthy for them, but in reality, this is just another. He's so self-absorbed. He wants the family back together.
He does, and
he's got no fucking clue what's going on.
And when we cut right to the therapy session, I thought it was a flashback, just because I was like, what? Therapy? This seems like marriage counseling or something.
Yeah.
So they do the trust exercise, the fall, and the performance is weird between both him and Hope Davis,
because he is performing. He is Dave Spritz, not David Spritzel.
Yes, that's a good point.
Every time he's projecting his expectation for how he wants things to go, he is Dave Spritz. And every time things go wrong, he's David Spritzel.
Yes.
He's this weird, like, morally depraved character where he will never do wrong when he's Dave Spritz.
Yeah, like even when he's at the company picnic, he wants to finish the race.
Yeah, he's another caricature.
He's posing it as like a moral lesson for his daughter, but I think he's more concerned about his image.
Oh, 100%. 100% he is.
Like at the therapy, when he catches her, he puts on a big smile. Is like, oh yeah.
Everyone starts clapping.
Yes.
And then he's the first to say, like, I had this pornography issue. She's like, listen, write it down, honey. Shut the fuck up and write it down.
And then she makes a pointed comment to be like something the other one doesn't know about.
Yeah, he's all show.
He is, and obviously when he goes into the bathroom and he opens it up, it's all show because he puts on such airs. I think an interesting performance moment is when they share the look as they're passing the papers to each other. They share a very long look, and you can tell that he doesn't trust her.
Nicolas Cage is an incredible facial actor, and like the way he uses his eyes, like he's always so expressive in the eyebrows, the uneven like eyebrow tilt that he always gives, the side eye, this worried look. The creases in his face are fantastic, and he's got a long face, so that's always really emphasized. And I love seeing a clean shave. Like there's been a few films where he's not clean shaven. I will always prefer the clean shaven Nicolas Cage because I get full view of that face zone,
of that jawline.
I want to see the action because that's where the action is, baby.
And the Verbinski does a lot of medium wide shots, so you get to see a lot of his physical acting,
a lot of center framing. And that's a motif that we get to see in a lot of his films. Rango, Pirates of the Caribbean, a lot of center framing, a lot of focus on these medium close-ups.
Mm-hmm. And I think what Cage does really well is he plays, especially when he's wearing his rain jacket and he's in public, he has this really hunched over appearance. It's like he's feeling the entire weight of the world directly on his shoulders.
He's David Spritzel.
He is, yeah, and just the way that he carries himself is impressive physical acting to me. So when people argue that Nick Cage is a bad actor, just look at him in The Weatherman because he is acting his body off.
No, look at him in Adaptation. All right, listen, man. As much as I love The Weatherman, like, be honest.
Okay, to be fair, yes. I think that he sometimes overplays a little bit. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, without question.
Once in a while, for the most part, I think it's subdued enough. But there are certain moments where I don't quite believe the character.
Yeah, and things get lost in that dreamlike state of existence that Spritz is in.
I'm conflicted about this performance because there is that amazing moment toward the end when someone approaches him on the street and does the classic like, "Hey, what's the Spritz snapper?
What's the nipper?
What's the Spritz
the
nipper?
Spritz nipper?"
And then Nicolas Cage.
Can I just point out that's I think the second black guy in the whole film.
Yes. This is.
I mean, come on, dude. The first one being the guy at the marriage counseling who walks in and Nick's like, "Sup," and it's just so.
No,
is it? It's so sweaty.
I disagree with you.
It's so sweaty.
No. It's the rate. Okay, Gore Verbinski doesn't have many black characters.
He's George Lucas.
He's not George Lucas.
He's George. He looks like George Lucas.
He does not. You have not seen a picture of Gore Verbinski.
I haven't.
Okay.
No, I haven't. I don't care. It's not important.
Either way. In that moment where the guy walks up and Cage goes, "It's February, man. It's cold. Fuck." It's just like this moment where he's losing it. And at that moment, I was like, wow, this is the dark night of the soul. But the interesting thing and the crazy thing that this movie does is it presents one dark night of the soul after the other.
It really does. It's kind of I love BoJack for the way the issues in like a paramount way just start building on each other, and like the characters attempting to make the right decision, they're always forced into the wrong one. Mm-hmm. And I love that. But circumstantially, Weatherman doesn't live up to that because there's always the better opportunity, and it's just his nature leading him down the worse and worse path. And by the end, he doesn't even figure out a way to move beyond his personal his self-obsession. He doesn't even move past that. He just accepts that that's his nature.
Yeah, and he doesn't even think that there's anything wrong with him.
No.
Because when he does get the job offer to work at Good Morning America, he tells his wife, or his ex-wife, I should say, that there's a $2 million+ salary.
Like, that's what's so important to him.
Yes, and he thinks that is what is going to win his wife.
That's the qualifier. Back. Yeah, it's absurd, and we see that, and it leaves you with a bad taste in your mouth. Mm-hmm. But that never like flowers into like some kind of narrative resolution,
Yeah, and actually one of my favorite moments in this movie comes during that scene where he's telling her about the job and about the new salary, and he explains that he wants to get back with her, and she's like, "No, not going to happen."
Dave, I'm marrying Russ. And all right, I want to say this. I have a long-standing anger towards Bob from Stranger Things season 2.
You
listen.
I'm saying exactly what I'm thinking.
I love the actor. Bob doesn't need to be in that fucking film. He's literally just there to die. He's a refrigerator husband. I fucking hate him.
So what you're saying?
I hate him. Winona Ryder is better than that. All right. And you know what Russ is?
He's
a
Bob.
fucking dildo. He's Bob.
There's that scene where
Like they even look the same. The whole time I was like,
that's exactly what I was thinking.
Bob, Stranger Things season 2.
Yeah.
Exact same person as Ross. And listen, I just want to say one thing. Fuck you, Ross. Fucking dildo.
There's that moment where
fuck you. Had enough. Like, this guy's such a fucking dweeb.
So there.
He looks the exact same as Bob too. What's the deal with these like guys just walking in being like, "Oh, listen, Winona Ryder, I'm good enough for you."
And then Michael Caine.
You.
Michael Caine shows up.
Yeah, he's
right
there.
then
He's
and
like,
there.
David. And you're like, what's your fucking dad doing here? How is he just showing up, just teleports?
He's like, what is a dildo? Hey.
What's a dildo? I don't even understand, Dave. My accent's bad, but it's better than Michael Caine's.
It's so funny that Michael Caine's character is so concerned about how much Dave swears.
Oh my good. And then I love the points of it, like the jacking and the chucking, and he's like the jacking and the chucking and the just I don't get a fucking he as he wanders away he starts swearing. It's the first swear of the film. The second swear's in the car. And on that note, I just want to jump back to you were mentioning about the nipper scene.
Yes.
I realized Nick Cage has this beautiful way of swearing that people I've never really realized. But the way he's fucking
yes,
he doesn't hit the U.
He'll just do like an apostrophe.
Shit.
He'll try and make it really short and snappy.
Asshole.
Yeah. Okay, but in that scene where Nick Cage tries to like get back together with Noreen, Russ shows up, and then you can tell that Dave Spritzel's anger is like building and building. You get the close up of him taking off the gloves. And I'm just looking at my notes. I wrote Deus ex Papa here. Because of all the time.
Yeah, because of the conflict there.
So
I love it.
So he takes off the gloves, and you think like that's a classic. Like you're taking off the gloves, you're about to punch someone in the face.
It's so good.
He slaps him.
I could taste it in my mouth before it happened.
You just see him pick up the gloves. His arm extends, and he whips Russ across the face with the leather gloves.
Not even really hard, but just in this like. Get the fuck out of the way.
And
who the fuck are you?
But the character of Dave is such an emasculated guy. And this movie is about emasculation.
Yeah.
And what is more emasculating than slapping a guy across the face with leather gloves? It's like the lowest of the lows.
And I love the way Michael Caine kind of projects that shame.
Yes.
Where he's like, "You're my son, you should know better." And we get a sense of that inner monologue where he talks about that.
Let's talk about the car scene, which is my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah, I agree.
This is the part where we've seen Caine throughout the entire film play this. He's not deeply masculine, but he's a good father. He's a good man, and he's of his time. He feels like a real gentleman.
And this is kind of an interesting thing is there does seem to be this idea that floats through pop culture and Hollywood of like these classic men, and I find that really interesting watching As Good as It Gets and like Jack Nicholson, and like I've heard some people's interpretation of like whatever happened to these men. The fact is a lot of these people are just kind of toxic in their own right. Like Michael Caine's character, albeit kind of the righteous father figure and all, is not perfect and is not willing to open himself to the truth of the culture he lives in because he's just decided to stay as an icicle, a shaky icicle in the old generation, and he's reserved himself to that. So he has no idea of what's going on around him. That's not right. But it's interesting to see that dichotomy between father and son, classic and new, and like the folly of one, the sins of another,
Yeah. And, I think I will retract my words about not liking the shaky icicle image.
It's a good term.
It's good because right after his death, it starts raining.
He's a fucking icicle.
Okay, that was uncalled for.
He's an icicle boy.
He is. But you're missing the point. That's
all I'm here to do.
The point is, it's very true. When it's ice the whole movie until his death.
It's rain. It thaws.
It rains away. It's
the great thaw.
Yes.
It's the good thaw.
But that scene in the car.
Tell you what doesn't thaw.
my heart.
His wife's heart.
His wife's heart too.
She's a stone cold bitch. No, I'm just,
okay.
she's stone cold.
Right before talking about the car scene, though, we have to talk about
The funeral.
the living funeral.
Yeah.
Pre-funeral.
The pre-funeral funeral.
I wrote down right before he starts speaking, I love a good crazy ranting monologue. And I had forgotten that the power goes out right after his first sentence.
Dude, it's such a good plot twist.
It is. Although this movie, I wouldn't call it a plot twist because this entire film.
You're right. It's
about,
subverting expectations.
Yeah, it's about these moments where he expects things to go one way, and then it goes the complete opposite how he doesn't want it to go.
Yeah.
But we also get that moment where he goes out to his car, he pulls out his bow and arrows, which we have to talk about that very briefly in a moment.
Yeah.
And then he's shooting into a tree in just a public area.
Say whatever you like about Verbinski. He gives a lot of detail to the setting up of a scene. And like the first
he uses
2.5 minutes to almost every scene are reserved for the setting up of the scene. And in this case, it's getting the bow and arrows. Mm-hmm. And then he starts shooting the tree. And the first arrow bounces right off the tree. Holy shit. It's every time I laugh out loud. I don't know why, because it's such a serious moment.
But then he shoots 2 more right in the tree, which you're not supposed to do.
No, it's bad for the arrows.
That's not good for the arrows.
You ruin your arrows. He would know that.
Okay, I'll get to this, but his instructor is not very good.
I don't care about your archery experience.
So
boy.
He aims at Russ, who he sees out in the parking lot.
Yeah, smoking a cig.
Smoking a ciggy.
Which is a nice little homage to the fact that maybe he's not as good of a guy as we think he is.
You can take your Russ
He's
hatred.
a fucking dirtbag, all right?
Around here, we respect Russ the correct amount, and you've respected him the correct amount. But he aims at Russ, and Russ looks at him and doesn't do anything.
But there's fear. Because
there's fear in his eyes. Yeah,
the relationship between Spritz and his fear of like maiming another creature in that moment is just erased. You can hear the heartbeat. And for one moment, he's like, this is what hunting feels like. This is what it means to regain my testicles.
Yes, and that's going back to when his daughter was like, I'd rather hunt.
But it always strikes me as odd that Verbinski never presents that in a negative light. Mm-hmm. Like his dad doesn't even shame him for that in the moment. There's like an offhanded look, but there's never this like, someone get that guy's bow and arrow away from me. He's going to do something fucking crazy.
Yeah.
We just cut to dinner.
Yeah.
And I find that a little fascinating because there's this sense of like reclaim what is yours forcefully if need be. And I feel like this is a good time just before we go into the, further into the speech and talking about his relationship with his dad, learning a little bit about Verbinski. And there's really not much because he hasn't spent a lot of time talking about his personal life.
He's not a very public person.
His dad was a physicist.
Okay.
And had his PhD in physics. And I thought that was interesting because it feels like Kane comes from a personal place, the way he's presented. And I don't know about Stephen Concord, but the way Verbinski, did I get his name wrong?
It's Steve Conrad.
Who gives a shit? He's a writer. Who cares?
No.
The way he's presented as this higher form of being, this idea that whenever you're in his presence, you are less than. Like, I think he projects a lot of fear that I could see stems from his father. I mean, every son has to live in the shadow of his father to a degree. That's something we all have to face. And it feels like that's kind of his inner monologue, the relationship between Cage and Kane.
Right. Because then, of course, Cage doesn't shoot him, even though he wants to.
I wish he did.
And then
fucking Ross.
And then we have his speech, which is cut short. And basically, all he says is, "This song by Bob Seger, Like a Rock, reminds me of my father."
Yeah. Every time I think of my father, I think of Bob Seger's Like a Rock.
Yes.
Cut
Boom.
power. So good.
So then we get to the car scene, and Kane comes in the car once again. A Deus Ex Papa. He just shows up.
Shows up out of nowhere. And I will say this: Ice Cold Papa's melting a little bit.
Yes.
He looks sick.
You can tell he's degrading.
Yeah.
And this is the last scene with him, if I'm correct. He goes into the car and he basically is like, I really don't understand what that was about.
Yeah. But I like that. I like that there's this honesty between father and son that we don't really get anywhere else, even if it's coming from a sense of like Cage can never live up to him. So when he's there, he's recognizing that status, and it forces him to be more honest than he is with his family. Like his father's that outlet of understanding. It's not until he's with his father that in New York that he's able to make change with his daughter in a really nice way, I feel like.
Yeah. And this is the scene where he finally gets a bit of validation from his father. It's incredible.
It kind of contradicts the rest of the film, and I mean tonally.
Totally. Yeah, that's right. This movie has no climax, but this is the moment of emotional catharsis.
Yeah.
It's perfect because Kane looks like he could cry at any time if he wanted to. He doesn't, but you can just see behind his eyes there's this well of sadness. Because
one could say he's shaken.
Jeez. He's a shaky icicle in this moment.
No, it's because of the lymphoma.
So
keep up, Nathan.
I can't keep up. My mind is. We finally see Kane's vulnerability because this is throughout the whole movie. He's the character who's like, "What are you doing?" Like he's the solid rock.
He is what Dave Spritz, not David Spritzel. Dave Spritz is trying to be.
Yes, that's a good
this
point.
Facade, and it's and you can tell with Kane's character. There's years of experience there where like he'd met and shaken hands with the president once. Was it Carter? They mentioned that offhandedly at one point. He's talking about his dad. He's like shaking hands with Carter or something like that.
This is finally the moment where Kane shows his vulnerable side and where he says, "Good job on getting the job at Good Morning America."
Yeah.
Which is basically the first time that he gives his son any validation, because it's always like, what are you doing?
The first time we meet Kane, he sits on the letter of recognition to Good Time. He sits right on it, and Kane's reaction in that moment is he's so downtrodden. It's so honest, and I love it, man.
I have to bring up this moment because I think this ties back nicely. But during the first bit after they're leaving the hospital, when Cage is driving him somewhere, in the voiceover, Nick Cage is talking about how his father did this and that.
Yep.
And after the first line where he's like, "My father he did something incredible," Michael Caine closes his eyes, and it's almost as if he's reacting to the voiceover.
Yeah.
It's like he's tired. He's sick of it.
Yeah.
He's been getting this adulation his whole life. Yeah. Maybe that's his first moment of vulnerability.
It also starts snowing.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. I love those.
Alluding to him being just a fucking icicle.
I love those wide shots of Chicago while they're driving. Those are beautiful.
Yeah.
So he also says that he read the book. And
which is an interesting twist because you kind of forget about how he's even been presented with the novel.
Yep, and how he deletes the novel because he's lost all kind of self-regard.
Yeah.
And then he has this great line where he finally shows maybe he's not as in control as he projects to be. He says, "This shit life, we must chuck some things. We must chuck them."
Yeah.
And that's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Again, I feel like Verbinski tries to translate this emotionally turbulent ambiguity that, like, again, we've got the whole kind of distorted perception that doesn't really translate as well because of the jarring edits between scenes and stuff like that. I think the imagery there, it's not tight enough thematically to really boil down to such a neat little phrase. Like the chuck it, as much as I like it, and it's such good iconography for the film, it just, to me, it doesn't hit the mark as much as I want it to.
It hits the mark for me because right when Cage leaves the car, there's this beautiful shot, maybe the best shot in the movie, where it's Michael Caine sitting in the car and Cage is outside and his reflection is overlaid on top of him in the car.
Yeah, it's a really good reflection.
And then he walks away.
It's a great reflection.
It's beautiful. That
moving
is
beyond. But that's the moment where the movie then decides between the kind of redemption sought in change and self-preservation in who you are.
Now, I can't argue with that necessarily, but I think that because we're in the ending now, we're in the final 10 minutes. The rain comes. It's a sense of there's something new coming. There's healing finally.
Yep.
But then there's the bit where he's walking down the street, and then he talks about how if you strip away all the qualities of your life, all that's left is
Nicolas Cage in an empty city.
he says, "I am the weatherman."
Yeah.
It's depressing.
Yeah, I guess.
It's not happy.
And he's reserved himself to who he is and not
Yes.
to the betterment. And this is the thing that I kind of find fascinating about the movie is it's never presenting this idea. In order to sustain yourself in the right way, you have to be aware and live amongst other people. And the end is saying, no, you don't.
Here's what I think the ending is saying, and I think this is my quote unquote hot take about the movie. This is a movie about learning to find your own independent life beyond divorce. It's like you've had this family forever.
You don't think it's about being a good weatherman? Because I'm going to be honest, I learned a lot about being a good weatherman.
The moment where he's
I
like,
learned a little bit about weather patterns too.
the part where someone asks him about the weather, he's like, "There's variance, you know."
Have you met my wife's new husband? Like, fuck that.
What
It's
about
variance. I don't know.
the sequel to The Weatherman? Is him going around telling people in Chicago about Russ and how much he hates Russ.
I learn about how tough of a job the meteorologists have.
Yes.
And how they're just like, honestly, man, I don't know.
Yeah, he's like, yeah,
It's
it could be this.
15%. Nick's like, that's not good enough.
Give me a number.
Give me a number. And it's like this cry of like, give me something. I need to the moment where he's like, I need to understand. He said that to his wife when they're like talking about the conflict and how they're never going to get back together. And he's like, I don't understand. I need to understand. It's this cry of like, you need to work within the confines of my world. And every move that he makes to try to improve the relationship he has with his family is a move for them to fit within his understanding.
Yes.
Giving the bow and arrow lessons to his daughter and working. And then he becomes the one that's interested in that. The counseling session with his wife. The shit with his son just doesn't really work in any regard. No, really. It's disappointing. The only person that he is aware of outside of himself and his own understanding is his dad. And you know what happens to his dad?
He dies.
He fucking dies.
So what you're saying is that at the beginning, Dave Spritzel seeks certainty. Because there's the line where someone asks him about the weather. Yep. He's like, I don't know, man. Yeah. It's wind. It blows all over the place.
I don't know, man.
And then finally, at the very end, when he's walking down the street and he looks happier, someone's like, so is it going to rain today? He just says, who knows?
And the guy's like, I mean, dude, you're the weatherman. Come on.
No, the guy at the end's like, yeah, who knows?
It's like if you were to be in that circumstance and ask that question, you'd be expecting an answer.
I would laugh.
Like, you're the weatherman. Come on.
If the other person was like, who knows? I'd be like, you're kind of right.
I guess.
Real quick. The bow and arrow stuff is great as a metaphor. There's the scene where he goes and he has his first lessons and he doesn't quite get the middle of the target, although he hits it. I read this review that was talking about how archery is a great way of being like a spiritual center for him. Yeah,
well, he talks about having a good foundation, creating a strong triangle, like all the he walks through the principles. Can I just say this? I really wish they'd established the archery stuff at the beginning because it's such a good microcosm for the change that he's forced to go through.
It's established within the first 20 minutes, but it's
not... but not thematically.
No.
My favorite films are the ones that introduce the themes in such a tight way at the first 15.
I actually kind of like how the archery stuff it's not right at the forefront. It's a subtler metaphor until you get toward the end, because I think if it was overplayed, it would be a little too much for me.
Yeah, fair enough.
But there's a great moment where he's shooting at the target that's covered in ice, and the ice starts to crack and break
shatter off. Yep.
So it's kind of like that's him breaking away at himself, and that's not even his lowest point. He still has lower to sink.
100%.
But it is him starting to come to terms with himself and to kind of find his center.
That's kind of the defrosting, pre-rainy funeral defrosting.
Yeah, so I do love the archery stuff. I also love how it ends with him carrying a bow and arrow around
he's like,
in the city.
It's like, in order to be a weatherman and not have people throw food at you, you got to carry on a weapon.
But once again, it's this idea that the movie isn't literal. It takes a lot of metaphorical ideas, and this is one of those visual things where maybe he doesn't literally carry around a bow and arrow, but now he has a center.
Yeah.
He has his own self-defense. He
Yeah.
can stand up against these attacks that come against him.
Yeah. And I think to kind of wrap up like all the ideas that
Yes.
we're putting forward, when you look through Cage's performance as well as the whole film through the lens of David Spritzel's perception of the world, you start to get a better sense of what the movie's trying to do and say, and how it's an honest picture about struggling with who and where you are in the
Yes.
world. And I like that. But the first time I watched it, I didn't get that because I didn't understand that context. It just comes across that Nick's doing a little bit more of a reserved role, which I liked. And there's some funny tartar stuff. And Nicholas and Michael Caine talks about camel toe, which made me really uncomfortable.
Camel
You know,
toe.
that stuff doesn't translate, and you're stuck with basically clinging to the bits and pieces that are left with the film, and you kind of
Right.
walk away a little bit.
It's a fragmented
Yeah,
movie in a
yeah,
lot of ways.
yeah.
We barely touched. I'm not
Yeah.
going to say touch. We barely talked about
Thank you.
the whole subplot with the daughter, which I think is fine because it's
Yep.
It's
Yeah,
there.
it's better.
It's good.
She could have been an only child. They didn't need Mike.
Maybe
They
I
didn't
don't
know.
know. I think maybe if you had gotten
Sorry, Nicholas Holt, if you're listening.
either way, the Weatherman. So, what kind of Cage is this?
Yeah, I think it would be nice that at the end of every film we kind of talk about what kind of Nicolas Cage we're faced with.
Yeah.
Maybe pick some kind of symbolism, some iconography that we can talk about. And you know what I want to let me put this forward.
Yeah, sure.
He's the Robin Hood. He's playing Robin Hood.
Because he takes from the rich and he gives to the poor.
He takes the knowledge and understanding of the meteorologist's interpretation of the weather, and he notches it into that bow. He puts it into the arrow. He puts a little bit of pressure, and then he flings that at the crowd, and he doesn't know where it's going to land. He just knows it's going to hit and probably kill somebody. He's probably going to hit somewhere on the board. So, like, I mean, yeah, it's 65 degrees, and he said it was supposed to be 70. But, like, I mean, that's variance, baby.
Yeah, so again with the archery, for several years I went to camp and archery was like my
Guys,
thing.
thank you so much for
So
listening to today's
the
episode.
thing about the archery
This is going to be a really
have
fun
to be very
project that we're
focused.
going to continue
When you do
through
it,
for a
the
while.
archery is one of
Again,
those
we're not
things
following chronologically through the
where
works of Nicolas
you have
Cage.
to
Just
do
we
a
just
lot of
really want to
practice.
make it a
And
personal
just
journey
the
for
fact that
both
he
you
hits
guys
the
and for
target,
us. I really hope that you like the content that we're putting out. And just make sure to follow us at CTCC Pod. That's at CTCC Pod on Twitter. I'm going to try to do weekly episodes if we can. We'll see what happens. I'm Jacob. This is Nathan. And thanks for your patience, guys. Have a good week.
Archer in the end, and I think that's one of the great things about his character in Archer.
What do you say we cut the chit chat, a-hole?
This is him reclaiming his masculinity as a hunter, which is something I should have said during the main part of the podcast.